God, this is too much. I can't keep living in this cloud. I can't keep encountering this darkness with every breath. I can't breathe. Welcome to the Side by Side podcast. I'm Michael, and I'm so happy that you're tuned in. Now, this one, my friends, is an extra special podcast. We're going to dig deep. And as this podcast is always about connecting with the most deep and vulnerable pieces of ourselves, today we're going to go there.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side.
There's a topic that many of us deal with quietly, silently, that we battle, and we wage that battle internally. And there's so many Christians across the world and people that have no faith that struggle with anxiety, with depression, and it's an important thing to tackle, where therapy and mental health all intercede with the gospel. And today is Anxious but Anchored, all about mental health and the intersection with faith. And so wherever you are in your journey, wherever you are in your mental, I'm happy that you're here and stick around. We have this misconception that you can't be anxious or depressed and still be anchored in faith. But that's so far from the truth. You can battle with all of these things and still be a person of deep faith. The church has this really, really bad habit of casting aside mental health as though to struggle with depression or anxiety somehow means that you lack faith. And we kind of cast it aside and we consider it to be a sign of spiritual weakness. And if you've experienced that, my friend, I'm so incredibly sorry. Because it couldn't be further from the truth. You're not weak just because you've experienced these moments of great sorrow and sadness, these moments of a dark cloud that seems like it'll never be lifted. You don't lack faith because you have moments where you're gripped by anxiety of the unknown. It doesn't mean that God doesn't hold you. It doesn't mean that you don't have an immensely intimate relationship with God. And for many, many years, we've got this dynamic wrong. And there's been all of this interaction with the church that has diminished and hurt people. We've seen people battle with depression and be told by church members and church leadership, by pastors and trusted confidants, to just pray more, as though just praying more is magically going to lift this cloud of depression. We've been questioned in those places where we've had anxiety. People have told you probably that you must not have enough faith. You must not really trust God or believe in God, or else you wouldn't be anxious. And we've perpetuated this idea and this phrase that Christians shouldn't be depressed. And if you've experienced that in one way or another, I am so incredibly sorry, because it is just so far from the truth. Mental illness and mental struggles of the spirit and of the soul are not spiritual failure. I need you to hear that. It does not mean that you lack faith. It does not mean that you are not held in the arms of God. It's a part of the human condition. It's a part of our mortality. This idea that we would struggle with the totality of the human experience of loss, of the unknown, of the ups and downs of this roller coaster of life. And if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel frustrated, it's okay. I mean, we find it in the Gospel of John. Here's what John says in chapter 16. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And what does that mean? You're going to encounter trouble. Guess what? You're going to encounter all kinds of trouble, all kinds of obstacles, all kinds of things that twist you and test you, things that push and pull, this constant warfare of the spirit. It's a part of the human condition that we might experience physical and mental and spiritual troubles. And we have a hard time wrestling with that sometimes because we have this false mentality that somehow we were promised as Christians to live this adversity-free life. But that's not the truth. The truth is, at no point did God ever promise us a life free of trouble. In many ways, Jesus introduces us to the fact that we will encounter troubles. We will encounter obstacles along the way as part of our faith. The idea that to stand up, to live a life worth something means we're going to come head first into a wall or two in our lifetime. But here's what God promises. Not that we won't experience adversity, but that God will be right there with us when we do. And it's that presence, that awe-inspiring, unadulterated, undeniable, immovable presence that leads us into hope, that transforms our weary spirits, that are torn with depression and anxiety, and leads us into a grace that propels and perpetuates the promise of God. And that can be tough to wrestle with. And the reason it's difficult to wrestle with is because we live in a microwave culture where we want instant gratification all right now. And so when we experience these mental battles, these troubles that we just can't seem to shake, we expect a magical fix, and it just doesn't work that way. God doesn't promise that we not encounter the storm. God promises that he will wade through the storm with us. And presence means something. It means something. If you've ever been in a tough time in your life and you've had someone that has come and just been there, they didn't have to have the right words to say. They didn't have to have the perfect advice. They just had to be there. And sometimes there's something about the presence of someone where you can feel the heart. And that's just enough to ground us, to settle our spirits that are so on edge. It's just enough to get us through the night into the light of the morning. A really popular pastor, Rick Warren, who had one of the biggest churches in the United States for a long time, he wrote in one of his books, "Your illness is not your identity. Your chemistry is not your character." And we could take that in a vacuum, but the context of that quote is as he's processing and dealing with the suicide of his son. Now, if you've ever known anyone or encountered someone that has been close to someone that's lost their life to suicide, it's a really, really heavy weight to carry. And you can be left with so many questions. You can be left with so many frustrations. You can experience anger and sadness. You can experience shame and guilt and all of this bundled in together. It's really easy to step into depression in the midst of that loss. But we have to begin to recognize that our mental brain chemistry, it doesn't define who we are. You know, we can be diagnosed with this or that, and that doesn't change who we are. It doesn't change the heart that we carry. It doesn't change the love that we pour into the world. It doesn't change our identity. We don't have to be defined by whatever our diagnosis is. And too many times we smack labels on ourselves. I mean, as a culture, we do that already, right? We slap a brand name on something and we begin to identify with that thing. I mean, how many people do you know that just love Nike and they just want to wear a Nike everything? And you have a brand plastered all across you, and that's cool if you want to be trendy and hip. But before long, you begin to wear those things as your identity. And as you experience things in your life, you begin to wear other identities. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm a diabetic. I'm a mom. I'm a dad. But how often are you just you? How often do you wear your own identity? That special identity as a child of God. You don't have to be defined by anything except for who you are. And there's a beauty to that, especially as you're encountering these mental obstacles in your life. That you don't have to be reduced down to whatever your diagnosis is. That you don't have to be reduced to your worst moments. That you instead can be elevated to shine in the light of your true identity. The love and the hope that God placed inside of you. And there's so many people, so many powerful, important people that we celebrate in our lives that have struggled with depression, that have battled with it. And there's people that have lost their battles with it. And there are people that have still done great things even in the midst of the fighting. You know, I think of Charles Spurgeon, who's this fantastic preacher. And we quote him all the time, but he struggled immensely with depression. He described it as his dark night of the soul. And that really highlights it. But yet, even in the midst of his struggles, even in the midst of the push and pull of the depression that he was fighting, he was still able to be faithful. He was still able to be bold, all the while fighting darkness. Our lives are not promised to be adversity free. But your struggle does not mean that you're not faithful. Your struggle does not mean that God doesn't hold you. Your struggle is just an invitation for God to make a way in your life. So my friends, I plead with you. If you're struggling, don't hide. We have this tendency to go seclude ourselves and isolate, to pull away from the world when we encounter this brokenness in our spirit. Like a wounded dog, we just run away and hide. And I'm pleading with you, please don't do that. If you've encountered some brokenness in your spirit, if you're struggling, do not hide. You have to be honest. You got to be honest with God and say, hey, God, here's what I'm struggling with. And then I need you to find somebody in your life, somebody that you can trust, whether that's a loved one or a parent or a friend or a spouse or a pastor or a community member or someone at your church. Find someone that you can trust and be honest with them. There's a beautiful power in bringing things to light. Once you're able to reveal things and say things aloud, you relinquish their power over your spirit. And God works in the light. So start naming what you've been going through, what you've been struggling with. Name it to God, name it to that person that you trust. And recognize that you don't have to carry it alone. That nothing we do in this life we do alone. Even those internal battles, we don't have to walk the road alone. And I need you to step into the understanding that the church and our faith journey is a place where we should be spiritually growing, but it's also a place where we need healing. You don't have to be healed before you begin the work. Simultaneously, as our spirits are growing, we are also healing our souls. And that is work that is necessary to happen. And you need not fear that work. Just embrace it and allow God to work from the inside all the way out. You might be struggling with anxiety. It's something that so many Americans struggle with. This feeling of almost a fog. And in that place of anxiety, everything is distorted. We can no longer embrace reality. We can no longer cling to hope. It just feels completely overwhelming. And sometimes in that place, you can feel paralyzed. It's a totally rational feeling. I know I've experienced it, immense anxiety where it just feels like your heart is just pounding, just beating so hard. And even when you're standing still, it can feel like you're on like this treadmill where you're just going, and you're just not in control at all. And we tend to equate anxiety and this feeling of being anxious to the opposite of faith. But that's not quite true. In Philippians, it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds, as in Christ Jesus." When we read this, sometimes we can interpret, and sometimes we do ourselves a disservice with the way that we interpret things. This is not, and I repeat, it's not a command to never feel anxious. It's quite the opposite. It embraces the idea that we will feel anxious, but in the midst of that anxiety, it is an invitation to relationship with God when we do feel anxious. It is an invitation to bring that very anxiety that we encounter into our relationship with God. And that means something. It means something to take all of this stuff that you're feeling, all of this stuff that's just been crammed down, this overwhelming fog that feels like it's everywhere, to take it all and to hand it to God and say, "God, I don't know what to do with this. This energy is overtaking me. It's clouding my vision. It's keeping me from embracing your hope and your love. Can you help?" And when we relinquish that anxiety, we encounter some true hope on the other side. Imagine that anxiety is like a check engine light. And when you encounter a check engine light with your car, it's telling you that something's wrong. It's saying, "Hey, pay attention here. Something's going on." It's an alert. And our natural reaction when the check engine light comes on should never be, "Hey, go away." That's not the right reaction, right? When we see it, that engine light that is telling us that there's something wrong internally here, we don't turn it off. We don't shame it. We go under the hood and we see what's wrong. Now I ask you, how often do we treat anxiety with that same compassion? When our anxiety begins to alert us that there's something going on beneath the surface, how often do we embrace it and listen to the alert that our body is giving us? Probably not that often. More often than not, we shame it. We say, hey, go away. Now is not the right time for this. I don't have time to deal with this right now, or I can't handle this right now. I love that. I love when people just say like, I can't deal with this right now. It's like, well, is there going to be a better time somewhere down the road? Probably not. It's just compounding. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. You cannot ignore it. And yet that's what we do. And oftentimes in the history of churches and communities, we have instilled that type of mentality of just cast it off to the side. Just say, "No, not right now. I'm going to trust God. I'm going to trust God." Meanwhile, your spirit is crying out, "Help me." And our response to that cry is not now. How ridiculous is that? And so what do we do? What do we do? I mean, the old church model would just say, just pray. Just pray the anxiety away. But it's not that simple. Not often. When you have this deeply seated anxiety, your spirit is going through some real internal turmoil. And you might need more than just isolated prayer. You might need help. You might need some therapy. And contrary to popular belief, therapy can be a good thing. Some would argue that everyone needs a little bit of therapy, and I might fall in that category. Therapy can be immensely productive for your development, both spiritually and mentally. And when you couple good therapy with prayer, you can overcome all of these feelings that seem to overtake our spirit. You see, therapy begins to unpack and uncover these patterns of behavior, these patterns of thoughts. And in that place, we can come to discover the triggers that send us into these spirals. We can come to identify what tools are necessary to address those patterns, to address those triggers. And guess what prayer does when it's coupled with that internal work? Well, it invites God to be right in the middle of it. It invites God into the workplace of our spirits. And that invitation means something. You know, the author, Sarah J. Robinson, she writes in her book, I Love Jesus, But I Want to Die. Really great book. She writes, Jesus doesn't heal us by shaming our pain. He heals us by entering it. And my friends, that means something. If you're experiencing internal discomfort, internal anguish, we have to invite God to dwell right in the middle of it, to begin the renovation and transformation process in our very souls. And so here's what I want you to try. I want you to try something called breath prayer. When you do it, I want you to inhale. I want you to take in really deeply, take in the air into your spirit. And in that place, in that inhale, I want you to say, I cast my cares on you. And as you've inhaled that prayer, I want you to exhale. And when you exhale, I want you to exhale, for you care for me. I cast my cares on you, for you care for me. I cast my cares on you, for you care for me. And do that again and again and again. And I want you to try this for a little section of the day, every day. And let your body join your spirit in finding the calm spaces. And in that place, we invite God to do the work right in the middle of our anxiety. The truth about depression is it's not just sadness. You know, I experienced a long bout with depression when I was a young person. And you could say that if I went to a therapist today, I'd probably still be diagnosed with clinical depression. But as I was going through some real intense therapy, I would try to put words to what I was feeling. And I couldn't express what I was feeling. As a young person, I almost couldn't even find the words. Like, the best way that I could describe the depression that I was feeling was, it's like a cloud, like this dark cloud that's just like hanging over me. And for every moment that I feel like some light sneaks through the clouds and I take a step towards the light, the cloud follows me. And suddenly the cloud would get so connected to my movements that it almost beat me to where I was going, that no matter how many steps I took in one direction or another, the cloud was always there. And it's immensely frustrating to feel hopeless. It's just the best way that I can describe it, just hopeless. And it's this heaviness that feels like it'll never lift. I've heard it described as like a weighted blanket. If you've ever had a weighted blanket, just like on you, but then like you're claustrophobic too. And so you just have this like huge weight that's just like sitting on your chest, and it just feels insurmountable. And it doesn't matter where you go or what you do, like there's just no overcoming it. And it made it really difficult to be present. I'd come home from school and, I had a room in our basement growing up, and I would go down to the basement, and I didn't want to hang out with anybody, and I'd turn out all the lights, and I would just sit in the darkness. I would not turn on the TV, wouldn't turn on any lights. I wouldn't be scrolling on my phone. Sometimes I would go sit in the middle of the dark, like family room, and I'd sit underneath our pool table where I felt like it was just the darkest. And it was overwhelming. And my parents linked me up with a really good therapist, and I felt like I made some positive progress as a young person, but one of the practices that she gave me was guided meditation. And I was never a meditation person, but this guided meditation was essentially all these different CDs of someone walking you through reconnecting. So all it was reconnecting. And through those CDs, just listening to someone walk me through, closing my eyes and connecting with my breath, breathing in slowly and out, even slower, and focusing on the cadence of my breath, in and out, in and out, and then feeling my fingertips, wiggling my fingers, feeling the blood flow and the life flowing through my hand, and then moving my wrists around, reconnecting with both the left and the right, and feeling that energy move up my arms towards my elbows, which work. First bending and then straightening, bending and straightening my biceps and my triceps working together, all of that energy moving up to my shoulders, which feel so tight. Maybe I need to move them around to loosen up that energy. Moving round and round in circles, reconnecting my bones and my muscles, my tendons, to the brain that drives them. And that energy moving all the way up to my neck, moving my neck in a circle, just like the clock, around and around and around, reconnecting with one side and the other side, and that energy moving all the way up until I'm right here, right now, centered. And it really helped, that meditation, as I worked through this cloud that I couldn't escape. And what was powerful about the meditation is for those 5 to 10 minutes every day when I would do a meditation, I was present. I wasn't living in the past or the future. I wasn't clinging to the dread that I knew awaited me in the next moment. I was just here. And maybe the meditations distracted me from the cloud. Maybe the meditations connected me with myself. But it made a tremendous impact for those 5 to 10 minutes that I felt free. And there's a power to that. As I grew older, I was able to connect in that same way and ground myself in the presence of God. To allow the Spirit of God to invite me in that freedom, to invite me in that presence. And that's not to say that there weren't immense moments, hours, days, weeks, months on end where I was caught in the absolute dread of the next moment, of the last moment. But when I plugged in and truly reconnected to the Spirit, I felt free. I was finally able to step out from underneath the cloud and embrace the light that God shines. But walking through that journey and still dealing with the journey, I recognize the splendor of that light, but also the immense toll of that darkness. And maybe you're in that place where you've experienced some of that cloud, that heaviness that doesn't lift. And I need you to know that it doesn't mean that God is absent. It doesn't mean that you can't encounter the light. It just means that God is making a way. God is still at work in you. God is still transforming you. And despite popular belief, it's biblical. It's biblical. Example after example of people that have struggled with this same heaviness. You know, Elijah encountered it. In 1 Kings, he has this great victory. And then he runs into the wild and he tries to escape. And he prays. He actually prays to die. He says, look, I've had enough. Please, Lord, take my life. And I can honestly say I've been there. And I know that so many of you have too, where you just say, God, this is too much. I can't keep living in this cloud. I can't keep encountering this darkness with every breath. I can't breathe. But my friends, here's what God says. Here's what God does. God doesn't scold him. He doesn't belittle him. He doesn't rebuke him. God sends food. God sends rest. And then God sends the whispers of presence. And that, my friends, is grace. And I pray that you encounter that God in those moments where you're ready to throw in the towel, when you're ready to quit, when it's just too much, that you hear the same voice, the same whisper that Elijah does, that you encounter the same grace. And there's countless examples in our world. The first one that comes to mind is Michael Phelps, right? This great Olympian, like this hero, right? In American sports, he encountered so much darkness. I mean, he encountered a depression that almost cost him his life multiple times. And that is in spite of his success. Even though he was successful, even though he carried all these accolades, he still was overwhelmed with depression. And so finally, he got to a point where he sought help, where he found and discovered community and relationship. And now he's able to be a life force for people that he comes into contact with that need help, that need transformation in their life. The author Henry Nouwen writes, "Our wounds are often the openings into the best and most beautiful parts of us." And there's a real truth to that. That God doesn't use perfect people. God uses broken people. And the truth of the matter is, light shines through the cracks in our spirits. And I'm not sure if the mosaic would be as beautiful if all the pieces of glass weren't cracked and broken. There is a transformation that's happening in our spirit. And it doesn't come without pain. It doesn't come without suffering. It doesn't come without brokenness. But it always comes with the light of God in tow. So I pray that you don't make decisions in the dark of night. That if you feel like giving up, that you don't decide in the dark what is meant to be resolved in the light. My friend, if you're in a dark valley, you know someone that's in a dark valley, don't ever walk it alone. That you have the courage to reach out and talk to someone, talk to a therapist, talk to a pastor, talk to a counselor, talk to a friend. You don't have to do it by yourself. That you come to recognize that your valley is not your end. That healing only begins with one single brave step. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single brave step. And I pray that today is the day that you take that step. And so as we encounter all of this anguish, this mental struggle, what do we do? You know, there's still a lot of Christians that wonder and wrestle with the idea of seeking help or treatment. And it's kind of like a taboo subject because nobody really wants to admit or acknowledge that they need help. And nobody really wants to go for treatment somewhere or begin a treatment process. And if we do, we want to just keep it under wraps because it's embarrassing, right? And we're not supposed to need it, right? I mean, God forbid you go see a therapist or you take medication. I mean, that isn't biblical, right? False, false, false. It couldn't be further from the truth. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And what does that mean? Jesus is affirming the role of care in our lives. And that means something. We have to come to recognize that therapy and medicine aren't somehow anti-faith. God uses a multitude of tools to help in healing, and they can absolutely be used as tools if that's what's necessary in your treatment plan. The truth is, therapy is not ungodly. It is part of God's ultimate provision in our lives. It's imperative that we have a relationship with God, that we communicate with God and we commune with God. But it's also important that we have other relationships in our lives, people that we can gain and glean wisdom from, that we can share our worries and our fears, that we can gain inspiration from and motivation, that we can learn from, that can keep us accountable and keep us disciplined, that can help us grow and further our spiritual gifts. We need advisors and counselors and therapists and pastors and spiritual leaders and mentors. We need friends and confidants. We need loving relationships. And there's no shame in that. It is imperative to our walk with God and our walk through this journey of life. And in the same way that you wouldn't shame someone for taking insulin for diabetes or taking hypertension medicine for high blood pressure, mental health medication can be the same. It can be something that stabilizes but does not define a person. And maybe that's what's necessary for some people. And if it is, for you or for someone that you know that it's okay. That God is still in the process of refining and restoring your spirit. And God will use whatever tools are at his disposal to make that work happen. There's this psychiatrist and this Christian author, Dr. Kurt Thompson, and he writes this book, The Soul of Shame. And he says, neuroscience is finally catching up to what the Bible always taught, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, body, mind, and spirit. And we are, my friends, fearfully and wonderfully made. And all of our chemistry is a little bit different. And all of our experience is a little bit different. And all of our processing is a little bit different. And that means that we encounter obstacles in a different way. That means that we interpret experiences in a different way. And that means that we process our brokenness in a different way. And that is and always will be okay. So I need you to take inventory of your mental health in a real and earnest way. Where are you at? Do you need to talk to someone? A professional, someone trusted in your life? Pray about it. Yes, pray. But also, in that place, plan. Plan to make the call, to schedule that appointment. Because here's the truth, my friend. Faith isn't just belief, it's also action. The action matters. So God is giving you the tools, the resources necessary to begin the healing process of your spirit. And it's up to you to put it into action. As we begin the care of our souls, where does the gospel fit in? What role does God play in this whole thing? As we work through the process, we come to know and realize that the gospel is not like this magical cure. In the same way that you've been walking through this faith for all these years and you've still encountered adversity, you've still encountered anxiety, you've still encountered depression, it's not a magical cure. It wasn't then, and it's not going to be now. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it can be this solid anchor in the midst of the storm. I mean, that's what Hebrews says. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. And that hope, it isn't like just positive thinking. That hope is tethered to something that's immovable. And it's immovable even when everything feels like it's falling apart. That God doesn't promise that we won't face darkness. But here's the kicker. God promises that we don't face that darkness alone. And what is that hope? Well, it's not pretending like everything's fine. Because if you're experiencing this turmoil in your spirit, everything is not fine. And it's important that you acknowledge that. That is a real distinction. That hope is not just pretending like it's all good. You know, when people ask you, how are you doing? And you say you're fine, but really like you're ready to cry at any point, like you're overwhelmed and you're frustrated and you're not doing well. But when people ask you how you're doing, you still say, I'm doing fine. That's pretending like everything is okay. And that's not what hope is. Hope acknowledges the brokenness of your spirit. Hope acknowledges that everything right now is not okay. But that even in the midst of everything not being okay, of your spirit being at war, of your heart being broken, and you having this real turmoil in your brain, hope is believing that God is present even when everything's not okay. It's trusting that our story is not over, my friends. And it's not. The story is still being written right now, in this very moment. A story in which God is making a way in our lives. And maybe right now in this chapter, everything's not okay. Maybe in this chapter, everything has gone to hell and we are frustrated and immersed in the greatest battle of our lives. And even if that's the case, we still have hope. John Mark Comer writes in The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, to be spiritually healthy, we must slow down enough to hear God's voice, feel our own souls, and learn to love well. And what does that mean? That means building rhythms of stillness, of prayer, of scripture, of Sabbath in our lives. That means tethering ourselves to things and learning how to build anchors for our spirits. And what does that look like for you? When everything feels out of control, what does it look like to ground yourself in something, to anchor to something? Well, if you don't have an anchor practice, you got to start small. Just a verse every single day. Just 1 hour offline every single week. Just 5 minutes of silence in the morning. Allowing God to speak to you through the stillness. It's not just surviving, it's learning how to live again. And in that living, in that thriving, we can learn how to hold on to hope. So, my friends, it's time that we were honest with ourselves. Everything's not okay. Your world might be falling to pieces right now. And if it is, own it. Life is hard. And sometimes even our faith doesn't make the pain go away. But here's what our faith does. It gives hope. It gives purpose to the pain. And so if you're anxious, know that you're not alone. If you're depressed, know that you're not forgotten. If you're in therapy, know that you're not weak. And if you're medicated, know that you're not faithless. My friends, you are anchored in a Savior that knows what it's like to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? A God that felt all of that and still walked out of the tomb. And so it's imperative that you know that you are seen, that you are loved, that you are held. My friends, I pray that wherever you are on your journey, that you embrace the hope of God, that you allow light to shine through the cracks in your spirit, and you know that you are loved without a shadow of a doubt. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in. I want you to know that I'm praying for you. And if this episode resonated with you in any way, that you share it with a friend, that you like it, that you comment down below what you thought, that you keep the conversation going, that we never leave anyone behind, because you don't have to walk through this journey alone. God's got you, and I've got you too. Thanks for tuning in.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be